Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 362, interview with Michael Benson about his book, Gangsters versus Nazis. Michael Benson, the author of over 60 books, which include the nonfiction crime story Betrayal in Blood and Who's Who in the JFK Assassination, comes on the show to discuss his latest book, Gangsters versus Nazis, How Jewish Mobsters Battled Nazis in Wartime America. Mr. Benson, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Ray, for having me.
Absolutely. So the very first question is, have you started shooting the movie yet? If not, why not? And if you have, where are you at? And I will join you. I'll carry your luggage. I'll drive your car. This has got to be made into a movie.
Oh, Ray, I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
Of all the books I've written, and I've written maybe 80 of them.
Right.
Not all of them were thick
Right.
volumes. I wrote Essential Bowling, for example. That would not have made a good movie. But this one,
Right?
out of all the books I've written, should be a motion picture.
Yes. You know what would be fun to do was just to sit around and think about who you would cast for the various roles. That would be a who's who of Hollywood. But anyway.
Well, I'm envisioning a Nazi on the stage at the Oscars.
Right.
And I run up.
Yeah.
Punch him right in the nose slapping.
Right. Yeah.
And
close hand.
The book is about punching Nazis in the nose, which is, I think, something that everybody wants to do, except for the few Nazis that are still around.
That are here. And hopefully they're fearful of being punched. So, so let's jump into this. So, like you were saying a second ago, as a writer of over 60 books, how did this incredible subject come to your attention?
Well, I knew parts of the story from reading the 26 volumes of the Warren Commission testimony when I was doing Who's Who in the JFK assassination.
Wow.
I had read biographies of various mobsters of the era. Meyer Lansky and Mickey Cohen both mentioned it in their books. Word of mouth. And I knew about American Nazis parading and rallying in New York City. There had been some profiles on that in the last few years. But I didn't realize how organized the anti-Nazi movement was in 1938 America.
Right.
Until my agent, Doug Grad, alerted me to an article by Robert Rockaway in Tablet Magazine, which introduced me to Judge Nathan Perlman, who is the true hero of the book.
Right. Oh, that's great. So let's set this up. Can you give us an idea of what it was like for the Jewish people in New York, Newark, Chicago, places like that? I mean, everybody's struggling, but they seem to have a little extra layer of frustration going on.
Yeah, everybody was poor. America was 9 years into the Great Depression. But Jews in America had it particularly rough because they were ostracized from Gentile society for the most part. There were only a few occupations that Jewish men and women were allowed to have.
Wow.
And they lived almost entirely among themselves in tightly packed Jewish neighborhoods in many of America's big cities, having come from Europe where, to say the least, the persecution was even worse. So Jewish people in America were already having problems when the German-American Bund begins holding rallies and parades, singing the praises of Adolf Hitler and blaming all of the world's problems on the Jews.
Right.
There were an estimated 100,000 followers of the Nazi Party in America in 1938. But it wasn't the numbers of Nazis that bothered Jewish leaders the most, but the brazen nature of their actions. Holding parades in Manhattan that looked like the Macy's parade, except for with goose stepping and Sieg Heiling.
Oh my God!
And all of the speeches going on, during which the solutions to the Jewish problem were discussed at the top of their lungs.
Right.
And the Bund told America that the Jews were responsible for the Depression. The reason nobody had any money is because the Jews had it all.
Right.
They were communists. And, this all must have come as such a shock to the Jewish rag picker in Newark, New Jersey, whose horse just dropped dead in the middle of the street. He's going, I don't think I have all the money.
I got money? Where's my money?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, luckily for the rest of the Jewish American community, there was a new generation of Jewish men who didn't follow Gentile rules. They didn't even follow the law. They didn't wait to be given a piece of the pie. They went out and took it.
Right.
And if confronted by anti-Semitism, they would feed it a knuckle sandwich.
But that's what you do. I mean, they were like third or fourth generation. They're like, hey, I see what this has done to my parents, my grandparents. I'm not doing this.
That's right. And sometimes it broke Mom's heart.
Yes.
But they were not going to live in poverty, and they didn't.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're businessmen. I know I've so many stories of, trying to take care of their mothers and fathers and get them nice things and put them in nice homes or whatever. But yeah, they literally saw their parents breaking their back and being treated like crap for it and not being paid very much and being told to stay in their own lane. They're like, no.
Well, and being threatened by bullies and threatened with even worse by organizations.
Right.
Who are screaming lies at the top of their lungs.
Exactly. And as we're going to see later, besides the German American Bund, the anti-Semitism is quite, I don't even know what the prevalent, popular, I don't even know what the appropriate word is, but even though they're the tip of the spear, there's a lot of this going on in American culture at the time.
Well, there's not a lot of voices in America defending the Jews.
Right. Good point.
Mr. and Mrs. America kind of don't care.
Yeah. No one's speaking up for them.
And all racism and bigotry in 1938 seemed to be shockingly mainstream from a modern point of view.
Right. So yeah, hopefully we're doing better now. We'll continue to do better. So let's jump into the story. Could you introduce us into some of the major characters in your book, the various gangsters who are the heroes in this story, and of course some of the American Nazis?
Okay. Well, I'm going to start with Judge Perlman.
Okay.
And because he's really the catalyst.
Right.
He was born in Poland. He came to New York City when he was 4 years old, went to NYU Law School, served in both the New York State Assembly and then as a U.S. congressman before he was appointed to the bench. He was a barrel-chested guy with a big guffaw when he laughed. He was active in Jewish affairs, and he enjoyed a good time. He would walk into a bar in Lower Manhattan near the courthouse, and he would say, "I voted to repeal prohibition." And everybody would buy him a drink, and he never had to buy a drink for the rest of his life. And he was telling the truth. He voted to repeal. Yes. So anyway, Judge Perlman is downtown in Manhattan outside the U.S. Customs building in Bowling Green, southern tip of Manhattan. And there's a ceremony going on, patriotic American ceremony. I believe new U.S. citizens were being sworn in, but they had to move the ceremony inside because the German-American Bund was having a rally in Bowling Green Park. Right. And that just steamed him. So he went into a nearby tavern, he brooded over his drink, and then he snapped his fingers, and he got up, and he went into a payphone, dropped his nickel, and called an acquaintance of his, Meyer Lansky, who was, and probably still is, the biggest all-time Jewish gangster.
Wow.
Now, Perlman needed Jewish gangsters because they were going to ask these guys to break the law.
Right.
And that was something that your average Jew probably was not willing to do, risk arrest.
Yes.
And plus, the Jews were the ones who best understood the situation in Europe, which was really the story.
Yes.
It seems hard to imagine now. In 1938, most Americans were against going to war against Hitler. He'd conquered most of Europe, and still America figured we didn't have a dog in the fight.
Exactly.
But Jewish Americans saw it differently. They knew that horrible things were happening in Europe, that their relatives were being rounded up and no one was coming back.
Yes.
So they were the first to realize that war against Hitler was necessary and inevitable, and that war for the hearts and minds of Americans had already begun.
Right.
So, I wrote a book that had a subtitle. It was How Jewish Mobsters Battled Nazis in Depression-Era America.
Right.
And the publisher changed it to Wartime America. I said, is that historically correct? I don't think so. But the more I think about it, the war had already started. It just didn't have bullets yet.
Right. Exactly.
So now on the Nazi side, there are two Nazi organizations holding rallies in the U.S. The German-American Bund, which started out as a group of German Americans celebrating the fatherland, but it was taken over by Nazis, and they were given paramilitary uniforms that were brown, and they were called the Brown Shirts. And the leader was a drunken loner named Fritz Kuhn, whose oratory style was as much like Hitler's as he could muster. And then there was also the Silver Legion, known as Silver Shirts, although the shirts were actually light blue. And they were run by William Pelly, who was an ex-Hollywood writer who claimed that during a near-death experience, he'd been advised by God to spread the word of Hitler.
Oh, okay.
Now, at a typical Bund rally, there were large swastikas hung from the back of the stage, formed a backdrop. There were portraits of Hitler placed next to portraits of George Washington.
Wow.
Because they were putting it across that this was not just a German rally, this was a German-American rally.
Right.
And the men on stage were wearing little toothbrush mustaches, known at the time as Charlie Chaplin mustaches, but a few years later they'd be known as Hitler mustaches.
Right.
And their oratory style was just like Fritz Kuhn's. They'd wave their arms, spittle spewing.
Right.
And since there were no hate speech laws back then, as long as no one said anything obscene or shouted fire, they could say whatever they wanted. So when Judge Perlman decides to sic an army on the Nazis in America, he knew he needed an army of Jewish men who didn't care that much about the law.
Right.
Calls Meyer Lansky, and Lansky sets it up.
Yeah.
Now, Italian mobsters at the time were the ones that got all the press.
Right.
Yeah, they're the mafia. They're mafia.
Yeah, celebrities.
But back in the day, excuse me, the Jewish mob was very powerful.
Right.
Arnold Rothstein was the first, and he was a guy who once tried to fix the World Series. But Lansky came a generation later and was even more powerful, largely because he was best buddies as a kid with Lucky Luciano, who was the boss of all bosses.
Right.
And everybody always listened to Luciano, and Luciano always listened to Lansky. Wow. So Jewish men were making money and wielding power in U.S. cities, New York, Chicago, L.A., and the men who fought the Nazis in New York were members of a set, which needs a little explanation. It's an organization of professional killers who carry out contracted hits pre-approved by a commission of mob bosses.
Right.
So, and the set was put in place by Luciano and Lansky to keep everybody from shooting everybody else every time they had beef, which was bad for business. Right. Now, Luciano knew about Judge Perlman's request and offered the services of Italian gangsters as well. But Lansky said, no, thanks. Yeah. This is a Jewish fight. We're doing it for our Jewish brothers and sisters in Europe. Judge Perlman offered to pay them. I understand you're professional killers. And Lansky said, no, we don't need any money.
We got this.
And how many Nazis do you want us to kill?
Right.
And Judge Perlman, who is sitting next to a rabbi, says, no. If you start shooting Nazis, you're going to lose the moral high ground. Exactly. You might even make matters worse. You can. Lansky says, you're talking about violence, though, aren't you? Yes. Yeah. You can do anything but kill them.
Wow.
And Lansky says, and this is a quote, okay, we won't kill them. We'll just marinate them.
I'm scared.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. Yeah, that's a compromise, right? It's a compromise.
Right. And Judge Perlman says they should know that being a Nazi is dangerous.
Ooh, I like that. Because we've lost that. Let's be honest. We'll get to this later, but we've lost the idea of it being... Yeah. So
the no-kill rules caused a slight problem for Lansky because the Murder Inc. boys, and they were called Murder Inc. You've heard Murder Inc. These are the guys, the set of pro-killers that are going to be sent to fight the Nazis. And all of them are just dangerous as all get out with a gun in their hand. But you take the gun away, and not all of them are really that great in a fight. So he takes the boys... Gleason's gym, which is still around, but at the time it was up in the Bronx.
Right.
Gives them some boxing lessons. And in retrospect, thinking about this, I don't think it was as much an exercise in pugilistic skills as much as team building.
Oh, right.
Because these guys went out in pairs usually to do their hits. And now they had to be a small mob.
Right.
So, they're going to be going into situations where they're greatly outnumbered. And the way to do it was to do it with great enthusiasm.
Right.
And then their names are, of course, of great entertainment value. There was Bugsy Goldstein. There was Tick-Tock Tannenbaum. There was Pittsburgh Phil, who'd never actually been to Pittsburgh. Blue Jaw Magoon, because he looked like he needed to shave about 30 seconds after he shaved.
Right.
I
love that.
And those were the guys that took on the German-American Bund in New York City.
And I know you know this, but if you think about it, it's brilliant. Here's Perlman going, I need someone who's very comfortable outside of the law, and yet at the same time, I need them to be highly organized and disciplined and not make this worse. I mean, you talked about the Italian gangs, the Jewish gangs, the Irish gangs. They stayed away from each other. They are disciplined. They only care about business. And he's just taking one of these gangs and he's going, look, for you, this is personal. I get this. Here's what I want you to do. And they're happy to. So
absolutely, they, just because I'm a hood don't mean I ain't no patriot.
Exactly, I care. Let me show you how much I care by busting some heads.
Yeah.
Here's a question for you: what would you do to save humanity, and how far would you go to stop someone who is getting in your way? The ancient rivalry of assassins and Templars cuts to the heart of good versus evil, but it wasn't always clear who was good and who was evil. Plug in to explore the amazing world of medieval feuds. Echoes of History, Assassins vs. Templars is a special collaboration between History Hit and Ubisoft, the masterminds behind the Assassin's Creed games. Hosted by Dan Snow from History Hit and Matt Lewis from Gone Medieval, together they will take a close look at the real history of the secret societies, which inspired the Assassin's Brotherhood and the Templar Order in the Assassin's Creed games. Plus, they will bring on other premier historians as they discuss unearthing the myths of the Grail and who really was the inspiration for the main characters in the game. Echoes of History, Assassins vs. Templars podcast is available right now wherever you get your podcasts. Listen and subscribe to Echoes of History today to discover the hidden truths that have shaped our world and inspired the video game series. That's Echoes of History, wherever you get your podcasts. Listen today and subscribe for more. So you've touched on this a little bit, but what were some of the goals of the Bund? Because it's not like they were just saying, oh, America and Nazi Germany should get along. I mean, they wanted a more closer association.
Yes. Oh, well, in the short term, they wanted to unite German-American voters to create a political force that would get like-minded individuals into positions of power, the extreme right wing. In the long term, they envisioned a world in which America would have been transformed into a overgrown duplicate of Nazi Germany, where Jews would have been rounded up and executed, democracy would have been abolished, civil rights for minorities would have been non-existent. It's kind of hard to imagine who would have been left after the Nazis finished their purge. You know, I'm a Catholic. I might have gone. None of that. Vatican.
Exactly. Yeah.
No competing governments of any kind. And of course, in Italy, where the fascists were in charge, Mussolini and the mafia, the original Sicilian mafia, were at odds because they were competing governments.
Okay. And I imagine at the very least, Hitler would want the Bund to do whatever they could to keep America out of the war. Let me finish taking over Europe and taking other parts and removing one of the biggest threats with America's industrial potential.
Yes. And he thought of that long before 1938. As soon as he was in power, he put together a plan to conquer Hollywood, California.
Oh.
And he figured if he could take over the movie industry, which is the world's greatest propaganda machine.
Exactly.
Of course, once the war actually started, they cranked out anti-Hitler movies because the plan didn't work. And he put in a little team of operatives in California designed to infiltrate the studios.
Right.
But it didn't work because Los Angeles was just different. And Hitler had no concept of it.
Right.
What do you mean there's no German section?
Yeah.
What do you mean that there are no third generation
Right.
People from Los Angeles, Angelinos. It was all spread out. There was no tradition. It was completely devoid of tradition. In fact, everybody was making up things as they went along. And there was old money there, oil money, and they was really conservative and deeply anti-Semitic, and they thought that Hollywood was disgusting, but they didn't want to go to war with Hollywood.
Yeah.
Live and let live. They stay on their side of the city. We stay on our side of the city. We're good.
Right.
And plus the guys that Hitler sent were all power hungry on an individual basis.
Right.
And what happened was a lawyer named his name was Lewis. Mm-hmm. It was L. Lewis. And he recruited men and women Jews as spies. He said, if you're Jewish and you can pass for Gentile, I need you.
Right.
And he infiltrated this operation, and the women apparently did really good at finding out what was going on. Now, there was a plan to kidnap top Jewish stars, Eddie Cantor, and studio magnates, and kill them as part of the plan. And well, anyway, what the Jewish people did was they started spreading rumors about the leaders of the Nazi movement, and that they were all out to backstab each other.
Right.
And so much infighting ensued that everything broke down, and Hollywood went pretty much unmolested by this effort. And by the time the Gangsters versus Nazis war starts in 1938, that story is a few years old.
They take
and the Bund is recruiting at a much more grassroots level.
Right.
Then, as now, Los Angeles had a conspicuous homeless problem. Mm-hmm. And what the Bund was doing is they were just scooping these guys up, taking them to their own personal soup kitchen, and giving them a uniform with a Nazi on the shoulder, with a swastika on the shoulder.
Not exactly a recipe for success, but I digress. So, but you bring up a good point. I mean, the Bund is dangerous. They do have anti-American plans. And like you were touching on a second ago, the Bund isn't the only organization out there that's popular, that's anti-Semitic. And so as the Jewish mobsters move forward, they know they better be clever, they better be smart and disciplined, not go too far, because it's not like there's a lot of, besides Judge Perlman, I don't think there's anybody on their side.
Well, that's right. And I'm sure there were liberal thinking Americans who were on their side, but not enough to matter. The pollsters took a poll during the Depression, and they didn't have the courage to say, how many of you think the Jews should all be killed? But what they asked was, how many, yes or no, do you think the Jews should go back where they came from? And 10% of Americans said yes.
Okay.
That would be probably at the most extreme end. There's probably another 20 or 30% who, if asked, would say they preferred the Jews kept to themselves.
Right.
Stay in your neighborhood. Don't come into my neighborhood, please. And I guess it's okay if you're a comedian or you're in the circus or if you're a butcher, but don't try to compete with me or my brothers for jobs, because that's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
And it never really truly went away. I think there are many white Gentiles in America today who tend to think that they are the only ones who truly matter. Only our votes count.
Right.
I think is the thinking.
Yeah, and if you ask people to stay in their own area, their own neighborhood, I mean, that's racism as well. Don't ever step out.
Oh, sure, right.
So it might be a little bit more passive, but it's still the same thing. So
and that's the way it is in big cities for the most part. The neighborhoods have an ethnic identity.
Right.
And there are boundaries.
Yes.
You stay on your side of the street and you're okay.
Because this is what works. But see, here's the crux of it, and this is why Judge Perlman was so brilliant, because the Bund, up until the point they're cracking skulls, they're not breaking any laws. All they got to do is file some paperwork, file some request forms, and they're allowed to have parades. They're allowed to have meetings. Yes, they're saying horrible things, but like you said, that's not against the law.
Right. And it really isn't until after the Yorkville riot, which we will get to, Mayor LaGuardia has had enough of these guys.
Right.
And he puts in new rules. You can't dress like an army unless you're dressing like the U.S. Army.
Ooh.
So no uniforms, and that was half the fun for these guys. Is They got to put on the uniform and be
cosplay.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and I think a lot of them were exactly on that level.
Right.
Hitler's ideas are so abstract at that point.
Mm-hmm.
If you actually put one of these guys in a room full of Jews and said, "Okay, kill them," they wouldn't be able to do it. No, I just want to go to see my German friends. I want to drink beer.
Hang out.
I want to pinch the waitress's butt. I want
to look tough, but I'm not really tough.
But not really tough. They were an army of very pink men. So
about to be
what
black and blue.
Is the New York members of the Bund, to get around LaGuardia's rules, they get on a bus and go across the Hudson River to Newark, and the rallies continue.
Right.
So a new army of guys from across the river, because you can't really send New York gangsters to New Jersey, because that's a problem too.
Right.
So a new team of gangsters has to be recruited to fight the Newark Wars. Boy, did they ever.
Exactly. So I really want to get to the action, because the way things are in this country, you don't really mind seeing some Nazis get roughed up. So we'll get to that in just a second. But we can't go any further in the story without talking about Father Charles Coughlin.
Boy.
Because he legitimized so much of what the Bund was trying to do, or he attempted to.
Oh, yeah. The nation's most popular anti-Semite was Father Charles Coughlin. And he gave his sermons over the radio on Sunday afternoons. I think he was preempted by Pearl Harbor at one point. He didn't realize that was going to be the end of his career.
I love that.
But he came on right between the Rhythmic Ramblings program and Design for Dancing. And they called Coughlin the radio priest.
Right.
He had a velvety soft voice,
right,
and tenderly wrapped his hate speech in a warm security blanket of tone and comfort.
Aww.
In 1926, he built his own church, the Shrine of the Little Flower. Right. Another awe.
Yes, exactly.
And was given free radio time to promote his church.
Oh.
And his first shift from the religious to the political came in 1929 after the stock market crashed and the nation plummeted into despair. Everything was in black and white. And eventually, Coughlin broadcasted his program on nationwide syndication.
Right.
And he was dishing out a weekly strong defense of Nazi Germany. In particular, he praised the way that Nazis dealt with the Jews.
Right.
Now, the priest said that he was against all forms of religious persecution, of course.
Of course.
But the Germans' treatment of the Jews was a natural reaction to the communist threat that the Jews represented. Now, it's unclear if Coughlin was aware of the genocide underway when he said this.
Right.
But he certainly knew about Kristallnacht, which November 9th and 10th, 1938, in which Jewish neighborhoods were smashed and many of their residents killed.
Yeah.
Coughlin told America he wasn't pro-Nazi, he was anti-communist. He named the name of 24 Jewish men who were involved in the Russian Revolution.
Right.
He said the Jews had money and they were backing the communists, and the Jewish religion and communists, in fact, were synonymous, and that the power of that combo was making Germany sick like a cancer. Was it any wonder they wanted to cut it out?
Wow.
So without any sense of irony,
yes,
Father Coughlin says that many Jews in Germany have become powerful by using their talents to acquire positions in radio, newspapers, and international banking. The Jews, he said, were dangerous because of their solidarity. It was one for all with those people, so that when they wanted to be aggressive, they could Germany. He pleaded with FDR to pull American ambassadors out of all communist countries. FDR wanted nothing to do with Father Coughlin.
Right.
And Coughlin's ratings were through the roof.
Yeah.
So Judge Perlman got on the phone and started calling Jewish mobsters across the country, including in Chicago.
Right.
Anti-Semitism was in the very air.
Right. Oh my God. And that's what they've got to battle with. Yeah, and I'm trying to remember. So, like you said, the great irony: the Jews are losing their lives, their property, everything they own in Germany, and yet somehow at the same time they're taking incredible positions of power and dominating the non-Jews. I mean, that just makes absolutely no sense. And again, like in America, everything's the Jews' fault. Well, if they've got a ton of money, they're hiding it brilliantly because they've been working in that clothing store for the last 3 generations. So
exactly.
Yeah. So let's jump into this. So let's get into some of the action. So let's talk about one of the earlier missions, and you just, I think, alluded to it maybe a minute ago, but the Bund is celebrating Hitler's birthday. A lot of this takes place in 1937, 38. So this is going to be the Jewish mobsters, I think, first chance to show what they are made of.
Yes. April 20th, 1938,
right.
Hitler's birthday. Lansky takes his crew to the Yorkville Casino. Yorkville is the German neighborhood.
Right.
It's on East 86th Street. Or a little preface to the story. Albert Anastasia, the crime boss, he was known as Lord High Executioner. He used to have a trick.
Right.
If he had to whack someone in New York City in a high-profile way, either a famous guy or it had to be done in public, he would buy hats made in Chicago, put them on his hit team, and then after the shooting was done, the hoods would lose their hats and flee. Drop the hat, take the cannoli.
Red herring.
And so sure enough, the papers would then quote the cops the next day saying, "We suspect that a hit team from Chicago was behind the hit. They must have been brought in." Meanwhile, the actual killers are back in Brownsville, Brooklyn, about 6 miles from where I am right now, sitting in the back room of Midnight Rose's candy store, playing cards and waiting for the phone to ring.
Comparing stories.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So Lansky remembers this.
Right.
And so he gives his guys American Legion hats.
Oh.
And then sends them in to beat the crap out of the Nazis. So they're having a rally and there's speeches going on. And these guys come in and they've got sawed-off pool cues. They got brass knuckles. They've got their new pugilistic skills that they studied at Gleason's 1-2. And they go in and the Nazis are just stunned.
Right.
They have no idea what's going on. Who are these guys?
Right.
And why are they angry at us? What are we doing? What the heck are we doing?
And there's no talking. They just go in and start swinging, as far as I know.
Smack. Yeah,
Okay.
I think Tic Tac Tannenbaum and Bugsy Goldstein might have cracked a couple of jokes while they were doing it, as was their wont.
Right.
And the closest they ever came to the no killing rule was they dropped a guy out of the second floor window, and he broke his femur on the sidewalk below. But other than that, I think 7 Nazis had to be hospitalized.
Oh my goodness!
And that was the Yorkville riot.
Right.
It made all the papers. American Legion guys went in and started attacking the German American Bund last night. And the real American Legion guys are going, which lodge was this? It wasn't us. But they weren't really ticked off because a lot of those guys had fought in World War I and did not like the idea of Germans being aggressive again.
Yes.
It had nothing really to do with anti-Semitism, but you want to punch a German, God.
Yeah. We're
okay
kind of
with that.
Yeah, we're okay with it. Yeah. So like you said, Yorktown is where the Germans are.
No. Yorkville. Yorktown is the aircraft carrier.
Oh, sorry. Force of habit on my part. Thank you. So Yorkville. Yeah. So this is the German center, but now it's just been busted up, and we're going to skip some of these because I want to save it for the readers. But it sounds like the next one is where they need maybe to go to Chicago. Could you please introduce us to? And I love this name, Jake Greasy Thumb Guznick of Chicago, because he's going to get a call as well.
Well, Jake Greasy Thumb Guznick is the number 1 Jewish gangster in Chicago, and that's because, like Lansky, he's got the ear of Al Capone.
Gotcha.
Both Capone and Guznick went to Leavenworth during the 30s for tax evasion, and at this point, Guznick's out, Capone's still in. And Judge Perlman calls him up and says, can you put together a team of fighters for us? And it's a little bit different than it was in New York because Guznick and Capone have their headquarters in a restaurant on Kedzie Avenue in Chicago, which is the Jewish main drag.
Right.
And it's adjacent to Davy Miller's boxing club and pool hall.
Right.
Where boxers, including Barney Ross, the world champion,
right,
fought in Soldier Field. And so there's boxers and gangsters. And the line is blurred with some of these guys, of course.
Right.
Boxing was run by mobsters in the 1930s. Frank Carbo, Mr. Gray, as they referred to him if you were talking about boxing.
Right.
But anyway, Guzik wields tremendous power because he's Capone's accountant. And he contacts Jacob Rubenstein, who's right next door, little Sparky Rubenstein, who's Capone's gopher and young man, and that Barney Ross and a bunch of these guys, and also recruited at that time is a guy by the name of Herb Bryn.
Right.
Then a little bit more about Guzik before we move. Now, if you asked Guzik, he would say that he was Capone's business and financial advisor, and he, like Judge Perlman, born in Europe.
Yeah.
Moved to the new world when he was just a baby. Dad ran a cigar store, and Jake, when he was still a teenager, got a job tending bar, and sometimes he was a steerer.
Right.
Now, steerers still exist. That's like if you are a rich young athlete and you've just been traded to I would like to pick a city, Boston. You've just been traded to the Boston Red Sox.
Right.
And you arrive at the airport. There will inevitably be a man there who will not be the team's driver, but will say, "I'll give you a ride to the ballpark, kid." And on the way, he'll tell you where you can get all the drugs you need, where you can get the girls you need, and he'll give you, here's a free pass to the gentleman's club for later on.
Ooh, yeah.
And a lot of young ball players get themselves in serious trouble that way.
Right.
Which is when you have 24-year-old baseball pitchers who go into rehab for cocaine addiction.
Yeah.
It didn't happen accidentally.
Gotcha. Wow.
So in 1932, Guzik was busted by the feds. He served 3 years for tax evasion. And his first chance at parole was rejected because the board found that Guzik to be a menace and dangerous to society. And he said, "What?
Me?
It's got to be a joke. I've never lifted a finger in anger in my entire life." So he immediately returns to Chicago, resumes his position.
Right.
Although getting in touch with Capone involves a messenger.
Right.
And it was obvious that he picked up most of his fashion sense from Capone. They both wore dark trench coats and cream-colored fedoras with brown bands above the brim.
I love that look.
They're both in love with food. They're pudgy, had pudgy round faces and double chins.
Right.
And when it comes time to fight the Nazis, Judge Perlman calls Guzik.
Yeah.
And Herb Bryn, who is a Jewish journalist.
Okay.
Who grew up in that same neighborhood.
Right. Now, Herb looked, if I remember correctly from your book, he looked like he was the poster boy for Hitler's Nazi Germany. Is that correct? I mean, to put too fine a point on.
I had the pleasure of interviewing both of Herb's sons.
Right.
And their memories of Herb's stories weren't exactly perfect all the time.
Sure.
But they balked at the idea of him having blonde hair.
Right.
Well, Dad's hair was never blonde, man. Dad's hair was sort of a light brown. But you could pass for Gentile.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
So his writing abilities had nothing to do with why he was being recruited.
Right.
One of the things he had going for him was he'd been punching out anti-Semites for years, including, a soon-to-be famous story of him dragging a mouthy anti-Semite off of a city bus, beating the crap out of him from one side of the block to the other, and then getting back on the bus to a standing ovation.
The bus waited. The bus waited for his fight to be over. Come on back on, sir.
Everybody wanted to watch.
Yes. Oh, my God.
Because the guy had said some loathsome things. I don't know what he thought was going to happen.
So he's a reporter, but he's Jewish. He cares about his people. And like these other mobsters, not that he's a mobster, there is an element of patriotism. It's, they care about their country.
Oh, right. And these Jewish communities mix. I mean, the Jewish reporters, there was a Jewish reporter along at the Yorkville riots as well, which is why we know what we know.
Oh, gotcha.
And the thing is, when Bryn is told about what's going to happen, he says, I grew up on Kedzie Avenue myself. My dad had a hardware store. It was only a block or two away from Davy Miller's boxing gym. Wow. I wasted an afternoon or two in there. I know Sparky Rubenstein. I do.
Yeah. I'm your man. Yeah, because that takes courage. That takes courage to go undercover.
And his job is not just to punch Nazis. He has to infiltrate the German-American Bund. And since at this point they're not having public rallies anymore, because you know what happens when they do that, everybody goes to the emergency room. They're having secret meetings at a secret time and place.
Oh.
And sure enough, next time they have a secret meeting and Herb's sitting there innocently in the third row.
Right.
And everybody's been briefed, don't punch Herb.
Right. Please.
Herb's going to cower in a corner like he's a coward. Leave him alone. And these guys, and they did not need boxing lessons.
Wow.
Sparky and Barney and these guys are fighters.
Right.
And there wasn't even a lot of weapons being used.
Gotcha.
Although Barney Ross used a weapon because he said his hands were lethal weapons legally, and if he punched somebody and they died, he would be guilty of murder.
Okay.
So Sparky, gives him some brass, gives him a sawed-off pool cue or a sap.
Hit him with this.
Use this instead. Like this will be safer.
Here's the safe way to hurt someone. Here you go.
Yeah. So Bryn's assignment is to provide the intelligence, report on the rhetoric that the Nazis are using, report on any actions they had planned, because there was always a worry that it was going to be more than a meeting that was planned at some point, that there would be an attack.
Right.
To get copies of the propaganda they were distributing, hopefully find out where the printing press was, because that would be another place that could be busted up.
Right.
And that was what happened. And the Bund movement in Chicago is, again, it's short-lived.
Right.
Because the Jewish gangsters put together an army and showed that it was dangerous to be a Nazi and that Jews could be tough.
Nice. I have to ask, and I meant to ask this earlier, so Judge Perlman, that's a pretty big deal, an official, a judge calling up the mob and going, hey, between you and me. But I'm wondering, in your research, was I don't know, anybody higher, maybe FDR, was anybody made aware of kind of what was going on behind the scenes and choosing not to do anything about it, or did they just enjoy the headlines like other people?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
I kind of think not. Okay. I do know that local police forces were often being bribed by the gangsters anyway.
Yeah.
So they usually arrived just in time to pick up the pieces.
Literally. In this case, and some teeth.
Scrape up the puddles on the sidewalk and stuff.
So Yorkville is not working out for the Bund. Chicago is not working out for the Bund. And like you were saying earlier, to get around LaGuardia, they would just jump on a bus and head to Newark. So now it's Newark's turn to deal with this problem.
Right. And in Newark, the top Jewish gangster is Longy Zwillman.
Nice name.
And he's a hero in Newark, in the Jewish community, because he protected little kids. Even when he was a kid, he protected Jewish kids from the goy bullies that would come in.
Right.
And, not Nazis, but just anti-Semites who pick on Jews because they didn't fight back.
Right.
And he would whomp these guys. And get Longy! And Longy would come running, and the bullies would get theirs. Yeah.
Right.
Now Longy makes $1 zillion during Prohibition as a bootlegger. He's like the fifth biggest bootlegger in the country.
Wow.
He's got all the money. He actually does have all the money in the world, and he's the one. Dates Jean Harlow for a while, Hollywood. Yes, I mean, she's very sad when she has to go back to Hollywood because she got a contract to be in the movies. She gives him a little locket with little piece of her platinum colored pubic hair in it.
Wow.
And so she's so sweet.
That is sweet.
And yeah, it's nice. So Longy wants to stay. He wants to stay out of the fray for the most part. So he recruits to build his team of Nazi fighters a guy by the name of Nat Arno.
Okay. Who's
an ex-boxer.
Oh, God.
And has his own boxing gym. So it's like in Chicago. They're not going to have to teach these guys how to fight.
Right.
The pro boxers, they already knew how to throw a combination. And
right.
And it made a big, and they were also really easy to recruit. Yeah. Because they were already working for Bob anyway, and this was just another thing they had to do.
It's set up.
And,
it's already set up.
And nobody's getting paid, but it's going to be fun.
Right. I like a good time.
Yeah. I mean, when you box professionally, you have to face another professional boxer.
Right.
In this case, you just got to handle Hans and Fritz and their.
Right.
They might not even raise their hands. They're not going to know what to do.
Exactly.
And after boxers retired, many of them became full-time hoods. They worked as enforcers, bodyguards, bouncers.
Right. Yeah.
And in Newark, along with Nat Arno, you had Putty Hingis.
Good name.
A.B. Bain. There was a guy by the name of Bouncing Boy Levine. He was called Bouncing Boy early in his boxing career because he bounced on his toes when he fought. And he was called Bouncing Boy Levine late in his career because he always bounced off the canvas when he got hit.
He's consistent. All right.
Right. And Newark, for some reason, the Newark Nazis keep coming back for more.
Right.
They keep thinking that it's a sign of insanity. They keep thinking if they're going to repeat the process, eventually they're going to have a peaceful meeting and be able to sing the glories of Hitler without having to worry about their nose.
No. But you were saying a second ago, I'm probably going to say his name wrong, Zillman? Zwillman?
Zwillman, yeah.
And you're like, he's rich. I mean, he's like, technically, you're not getting paid, but I got all the bills. I'll bribe the police. Any medical bills come to me, any bail.
Nobody has to worry about any bills.
Right. I got you.
Nobody has to worry about bail money.
Right. I will take, and he does. He literally takes care of everybody.
And he also shows up for the first fight at the Schwabenhall.
We got to see that.
Yeah. And then he has to go around to all the reporters saying, "No, you didn't see me."
I'm not here.
He's suit and strutting around like you're a proud father.
Yeah. I'm here, but I'm not here. So sorry, go ahead.
And they say if you have to name somebody, name Nat.
Right. He's here. He's swinging.
He's in charge.
Yeah.
And if you word the article correctly, you might discourage Nazis from being in Newark.
Who doesn't want that? The majority of them do.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. If you have any other setup, please. But if you could tell us about the attack on the Schwebenhall, I'm not sure how to say it.
Yes. I do have a German background. I only had one grandparent that spoke with an accent, though.
Right.
I believe it's Schwabenhall.
Schwabenhall.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And it's the site of the biggest Newark riot. It's on Spring Street in East Newark. And about 150 Nazis were having quite a ball in a hall on the second floor of a big building.
Right.
They're singing songs. They're drinking beer.
Oh my God.
There's a big bus on the way from New York of the guys that Mayor LaGuardia chased out of New York.
Right.
And Nat Arno and his boys show up. They darken their faces with burnt cork.
Oh.
And Arno has brought a ladder with him. And he goes behind the building, puts it up, leans it against the back of the building, and somehow lifts the window. Maybe it was up already, but gets it open. And just as they're all singing and the speech is about to begin, he throws 7 stink bombs through the window.
Oh, my God.
And there is, as you might imagine, panic.
Right.
Now, and he's got guys posted out front. So when the Nazis come running out, gagging with their handkerchiefs over their faces, the stink.
Right.
They're gonna walk right into a right hand.
Oh.
So, But
Right.
something is going on in front of the building that Nat Arno did not anticipate.
Uh-oh.
And that is that the Jewish community of Newark is showing up in droves. Arno didn't bother to keep it a secret from his wife or
It's
his
entertainment.
butcher. And by the time the fight starts,
Right.
everybody in Newark knows that there's going to be a fight, and they all want to go and watch. And some of them are rolling up their sleeves. Oh, I want to get a punch in. So the fight's going on, and Longy's woman's walking back and forth. I'm here, but I'm not here.
You don't see me. Sorry.
So the inside of the building now smells like a septic tank.
Right.
And the Germans are screaming, "Help! Call the police! Call the police!" And the police, of course, obviously know what's going on, because if everybody in the Jewish community knows,
They know.
the police know.
Yeah.
And they're standing back, kind of not paying much attention. And
I don't see nothing.
right. So, oh
my God.
one Nazi runs to the back of the building to stop the onslaught of stink bombs.
Right.
And sticks his face to the window. And Nat Arno, who's standing on top of a ladder at the time, pow!
I don't want this man punching me.
Puts one right on his button.
Right. Oh, my God.
Anyway, Arno just feels vulnerable. Because he's on a precarious perch.
Yeah.
So he gets down, runs out front, sees that there's quite a scene. Far more people than he expected.
Right.
He had expected to see only the guys with their faces darkened.
Mm-hmm.
Jaime the Weasel Kugel was there. Putty Hincus was there. And they got Louisville Sluggers, Nuck Saps, and crowbars.
Oh, my
They wrapped
God.
crowbars in the Newark newspaper.
Yeah.
That's why you wrap the... I don't know. I could pick... I guess you're less likely to kill somebody with it if it's got a layer of newsprint over the eye.
Let's go with that. Let's go with that.
And Putty Hincus famously says, "Aim for the heads, boys." So some aimed for the head.
Right.
But some... Also, there were also a lot of broken arms because they would hit the swastika. Shoulder. That was where they would aim. So bones were broken, scalps peeled black. The cries of pain sounded oddly like the singing only seconds before.
Right.
And of course, fights being what they are, some of the baritones suddenly became sopranos because the heads and the shoulders weren't the only places they were being hit.
Right.
Now the fight's not over, though. Mm-hmm. The gauntlet of tough Jews have stretched outside the front door and into the street. And some Germans tried to fight back, but they were drunk, and their haymakers didn't have much effect.
Yeah.
At 9 p.m., you hear the first sirens of the police. Nobody runs away. Usually in a street fight, when the police arrive, everybody scatters.
Exactly.
But everybody stays.
Yeah.
And the Nazis retreat for a moment, and then they do a smart thing. They form a flying wedge, which was a football play at the time that was outlawed in 1905 because it had resulted in 19 deaths.
Oh, my God. That's a hell of a move.
Football players being trampled to death during football games. And it was just forming a human chevron, and the guy with the ball would be in the middle of it.
Right.
And there was no way to stop them until they scored a touchdown. But it had been outlawed in football, but not necessarily in street fights. And the Germans used this to get back into the building. Mm-hmm. So back in the Schwab now. Hopefully it smells a little better. I don't know.
Hopefully.
Maybe a little breeze would have helped.
Yes.
So Putty Hincus, whose story is the one we're telling.
Yeah.
He remembered the night with great nostalgia. He remembered the way the Nazis were stampeded expertly by the stink bombs, how they were sent gagging to a bottleneck and then into the lobby where the gangsters were waiting. And he recalled the beautiful sound of the Nazis screaming, and this is a quote, "blue murder." Mm-hmm. One of my favorite songs. Blue murder. It was and it was one of the happiest moments of his life.
Oh my God.
He always said.
That's hilarious.
So while the Germans retreated back into the building, the Jews did not follow, but they went up and down the street and they slashed all of the Germans' cars.
Right.
They smashed all the headlights. And then the bus pulls up with the New York Germans in it. And they come out and find themselves pretty much the way it had been in Yorkville. The faces are different, but the punches feel just
to drive all that way.
And that was the fight at the Schwabenhall.
Oh my God! So the Nazis just can't get a break. I don't know any other way to put that. I think you mentioned in the book that stink bombs and other things were used in several of these attacks, and it just drives your opponents into where you want them to be. So again, highly disciplined, organized, and if I can say, and you probably figured this out, the gangsters come across as charming, wonderful, however slightly less virtuous heroes in this book, and I absolutely love that. And again, we've only covered like half of the book because I want to leave the rest of the story to everybody else. But it is
about the morality of having gangsters as heroes. Let me just offer the Dirty Dozen defense.
Okay.
Which is that it doesn't make any difference how bad a group of people are.
Right.
As in the movie The Dirty Dozen.
Mm-hmm.
They're the heroes of the picture. Why? Because they fight Nazis. That's why.
That's all. You can always find a badder guy if you're a bad guy, and then suddenly you're the good guy by comparison. And so
that's exactly right.
Yeah, I'm just trying to picture. And like you said, Judge Perlman, he comes from the old country. He's seen a lot of things, and he's like, no, we got to handle this, and I need someone who's comfortable working outside of the law, and of course.
Comfortable hurting people, I think, is also a factor, which he may not have enunciated aloud.
Yes, but I think you said in your book, as far as I know, not one person was killed intentionally or at all by these attacks. By these attacks by the Jewish. They highly
the riskiest thing was dropping the guy out the window.
Right.
And there was one of the Jews was hurt in a fight from friendly fire.
Oh, yeah.
He got hit with a baseball bat from his own guy, and Zwillman paid for his medical bills.
Right.
And they brought him to the emergency room, and they opened up his head to relieve the pressure, and they left sponges in his head.
Oh,
and Zwillman shows up and says, "No, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired. I'm bringing in my own doctors.
Right.
Take the sponges out of this guy's head and don't let him die."
Oh, my God.
And the guy recovered, had a full recovery. And the fatal casualties, 0.
Right. He's that guy, American hero. And could I say, I've always wanted to be the guy to go, no, I'm bringing in my own doctors. I'm not there yet. Right. I'm still working on it, but I've always wanted to be that guy. So again, this comes out technically available April 26th, but obviously you can place your order now. But before I let you go, is there anything, again, we're leaving a lot of this uncovered, but is there anything else that you would like to throw out there that the people might want to know?
It would be nice to say that the Gangsters versus Nazis battles were important in the long run.
Right.
But it's a small compartment of history, and it's rendered moot by what follows. Mm-hmm. Everything ends at the point of Pearl Harbor. Right. Everyone's role changes. The Nazi leaders who had hidden behind the U.S. Constitution were no longer protected by freedom of speech. It was wartime. They were committing sedition. They could be arrested. The Germans who attended the rallies were Americans, so they were drafted into the U.S. Army and sent to the Pacific to fight in a theater in which their allegiance wouldn't be questioned.
Good point.
The Jewish men were drafted or enlisted, fought in Europe. Nat Arno, the head of the Minutemen fighters in Newark, he hit the beaches on D-Day and marched all the way to Berlin, touring Europe the hard way. And he claims that on a couple of occasions, he ran into German POWs being marched in the opposite direction that he recognized and who recognized him from street fights they'd had in Newark, New Jersey.
That's incredible. Hey, buddy, I haven't seen you in a while. How's it going? The last couple of pages of your book, you cover, this is what happened to this person, and so I loved that. But I have to say, at the very, very end of the book, you have this very powerful message about events like this should be remembered. They shouldn't be forgotten. And if I could just go back to something you just said a second ago, yes, in the long term, it didn't really matter all that much because Pearl Harbor comes along and suddenly everything is quite clear for the vast majority of Americans. But, and I'm sure you feel this way as well, what those gangsters did, I don't know, because we didn't or couldn't do anything about the Holocaust at the time. They stepped up and they represented America at a dark point, and they are the heroes, and they're the ones who took on the bad guys before America was in the war. Freaking American heroes, is all I wanted to say.
Yeah. And it's about time they had their legacy.
Exactly. So, yeah, but everything worked out. But I did want to say this, and I don't like to get political, but the stuff that in your book is pretty much going on today. So even though you have this message at the end about let's not forget this, if we were to grab everybody from your book and bring them to today's America, I don't think they would be too happy. They might be, whoa, we fought for this and now you're still dealing with it in America.
Well, I'm not as pessimistic as you.
Okay.
Hitler was defeated.
Right. Good point.
The Holocaust happened and shocked the world enough so that Jew-Gentile relations largely improved. That unthinkable sacrifice.
Right.
Israel exists now, and Israel fights like hell whenever it's threatened, which would appeal to them.
Yes.
There's still too much anti-Semitism in America, but it is rarely militant.
Right.
And the Holocaust deniers, I think, would have our boys cracking their knuckles.
Right.
I think those guys might have to start worrying about walking down the street.
Who's to say that's a bad thing? Watch what you say, exactly. Watch what you do, because if you know you're doing wrong and you should.
If you're going around saying the Holocaust was a hoax, a broken nose for you, sir.
There's a certain couple of cities you might want to stay away from.
Exactly. This one. The one I'm in right now.
Exactly. Well, Mr. Benson, again, we've only covered like 40% of this book, but I wanted to thank you for your time and thank you for this book. Please, everybody, check it out. Again, it's
easy reading. It's not academic.
It flows. It literally does flow, and I consumed it in a couple of days. It's Gangsters versus Nazis, How Jewish Mobsters Battled Nazis in Wartime America. Mr. Benson, thank you very much for your time, and I'm looking forward to reading the other 59 books that you've written over the years.
You can skip Essential Bowling if you want.
I'll skip that one, but I'll save it till the end.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
The Venture X card from Capital One gives you premium travel benefits, perfect for seeing Taylor Swift The Eras Tour, presented by Capital One. Oh, I do love her. Earn 5 times miles on flights and 10 times miles on hotels through Capital One Travel.
Enjoy your stay in Suite 13.
Whoa, 13? That's Taylor's lucky number. The Venture X card from Capital One. What's in your wallet?
Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com for details.